Thank you.
There is 1 host and 6 participants in this conference.
Okay, we're on my iPhone again. I dialed in with the speakerphone an hour ago and it worked fine, and now it won't let me dial in on it again, so I don't know what the deal is there. So we'll work with the iPhone and I'll try again at break time. There are 6 of you out there and 4 of us here. And let me know if you can't hear me. You've been muted, but you can unmute. And I'm going to turn off the gongs.
Entry and exit tones are off.
Okay, good. So the name of the class is Only God Is, or All There Is Consciousness. God and consciousness and spirit are all used synonymously. And we did 3 weeks on the nature of God. But what's important, I'm trying to give you an image in your consciousness of the wellness of everything, that everything is in fact well, that all is well, everything is exceedingly well. And it's a state of consciousness that, if I can indicate it to you or lift you to it so that you can see some of this, then there'll be a great deal of peace in your life. And that's what this class is, I'm beginning to think, is about. But it's been very difficult going, and the numbers are diminishing, so maybe I'm not being very successful at it. I hope there will be more people here physically next week, because it's very difficult to only talk with 3 other people in the room. I need feedback, consciousness feedback to deliver the class. The class is pretty much determined by the students. Any event, the important things to get about the nature of God are one, that that's all there is, and that God is consciousness. It's made out of consciousness. It is consciousness. There's no matter anywhere in anything. And God is, I'm going to say first, God is outside of space and outside of time. God is before space was and before time began. And God is expressed, however, in space and time. It's expressed in a faculty within mind that I was calling last week imagination. Awareness is another good word for it. God is expressed, I would guess, in its entirety, in its completeness, in all the infinite number of individualizations of God that are expressed in time and space. And that's all being done in a faculty of what we call mind, called imagination. And God is omnipresent, being the only thing there is. It's everywhere present. It's the whole substance of the expression of itself in mind. And it's omnipotent. It's the only power that's going on in the expression of itself in mind or in imagination. And it's omniscient. It's the only intelligence, being the only thing. It's the only intelligence, and it's the all-intelligence, and everything that we see and all the order and seeming order. Everything that makes sense to us is a reflection of the omniscience of God. It's an infinite intelligence. And I added to the three omnis, God is omniactive. All the activity that we see is part of God's only action, which is expressing itself. God's only activity is expressing itself, and what we see as activity is all the little pieces that go into God expressing itself, and it's expressing itself to itself as us, and through itself as us, to the other itselfs as us. So we are all nothing but God, and we are all instruments through which God is expressing itself and through which it is revealing itself to the other individualizations of itself. So there's nothing going on except God revealing itself individually to itself, and it's doing that at all levels of consciousness, from our pretty low level of consciousness, which is still material, to infinite levels of consciousness, which is the level of consciousness that God is at. And I said God is expressed individually as each of us and as everything, and one of the implications of that is that everything is God, is spirit, is consciousness. And that means it's not material. It all seems to be material to us. We see it through five senses, but there is no materiality. Materiality is a level of consciousness that perceives the nature of God as material. It senses God as material beings. It senses the individualizations of God as material beings, as material existences. And God is expressed as each individuality at all levels of unfoldment of that individuality. If God were expressing itself as a rose, it starts by expressing itself as a rosebud, and then it expresses itself as a rosebud, unfolding and unfolding and unfolding until eventually it expresses itself as the full rose bloom. And the God individual expression of as oak tree also includes its expression of itself of oak tree as acorn and as sprout and as shoot and as roots and as branches and as buds and as leaves and as eventually more fruit, which is additional acorns. So God, the individualizations of God are expressed at all of their levels, at all of their levels. And we as human beings are expressed as babies, maturing to children, to adults, to older people, to sannyasins, to people that are on the spiritual path. And we are also expressed at all levels of consciousness, starting with a very low level of fear-driven, guilt-driven, shame-driven consciousness, and developing up to where it includes courage, and then includes love, and then includes unconditional love, and then includes enlightenment, and then includes infinitely more levels of awareness, of consciousness higher than the enlightened nature of Jesus or Buddha or Krishna even. So we have this omni-activity of God, which is the revealing of itself to itself and through itself. An example is that when you look at a rosebud, over a period of days, God, I like the word rosebud because I like to say God is unfolding exactly as it should. The rosebud, over a period of time, reveals itself to have more and more, to be more and more a rose. Over a period of time, the rosebud opens and gets bigger and bigger and becomes a full bloom and becomes fragrant and becomes beautiful, and then it produces seeds that will produce more rosebuds and such like. So we can see in the case of a rosebud that its level of unfoldment goes from bud to rose to, and ours goes from infant to mature human being, and it also goes from spiritually ignorant to spiritually enlightened, at least at the human level. And we talked briefly last week, I'm not sure whether it was very clear or not, we talked briefly last week about the nature of error. And there are some important things to understand about that. What we are experiencing, you will recall, is a material sense of the spiritual individualizations of God. So what we're experiencing is a material sense, and I'm going to use the word an imagined sense, or a dreamed sense, or a sense, we're experiencing a sense of God as material, exactly as we experience a sense of our subconsciousness expressing itself in our dreams at night as material. So we're experiencing God materially, but it's all happening in mind, or I tried to start using the word imagination. It's all happening in our imagination. It's all happening within our consciousness. And it has no external reality. Just as in your dream at night, you're having a dream, we're having a dream that we're at Starbucks having coffee and such like for perhaps an hour, and nothing in that dream has any reality in what we consider to be the external world. Your head did not balloon up to be very large enough to hold a Starbucks, and there was no time. The dream probably took a second or two rather than an hour or two. And in the same way now, what we're experiencing is entirely within our mind, within our imagination, and has no external reality. No reality separate from, I could say, separate from God, or no reality separate from our own consciousness, or separate from our own experience. This is what within means. It's all happening within you. It's all happening within us. It's all happening within our imagination. It's all happening, well, that's sufficient, within our imagination. If you look at the material story about it, you can see there that we don't experience, if we if the material story, material reality were true, then the story would be that I'm looking at an apple and light bounces off the apple onto my optical nerve, and it gets converted into neurons and nerve impulses, and they go up to my brain, and they circle around in my brain, and this image of apple appears in my brain. And it's all happening within my brain, according to the materialists. They have no explanation as to where in the brain the theater is. But even if you believe in the material world, you have to understand that what you're experiencing is a bunch of neurons firing around in your brain. You're not experiencing an apple. And the question is, where did the picture of apple come from? You know, since your brain has never experienced anything other than neurons circling around in it, following its grooves, where did the picture of apple come from? And the picture of apple it came from consciousness. It came from Chubb consciousness. Your brain really is the story we tell ourselves about consciousness, but it really has nothing to do with forming the picture of apple. The picture of apple is a concept that our level of consciousness has about the God individualization which we are seeing as apple. And what determines what image we see is our concepts and our beliefs and our conditioning. We've been taught just by being born into human consciousness about what apples and oak trees and roses look like. They don't look like that at all. They're spiritual, you'll recall. They're not material. They don't look like that at all. None of that makes sense. That's what they look like to your material sense of yourself. And there's one more little level here, if you get it, that we're experiencing through our 5 physical senses, which are the 5 physical senses in a material body, which is the material concept of our spiritual body. So we have a physical concept, material concept of our spiritual body, and we have material concepts of our 5 senses, which are our material concepts of our spiritual senses, which are quite different. They're not material at all. And so all we're seeing is images in our mind based on the conditioning we receive, which is primarily done through consciousness, subliminally, Joel likes to say, primarily done just by being in the consciousness of the rest of humanity. Now, the nature of humanities, of Chubb's concepts about God's individualizations is totally ignorant and based entirely on its beliefs. What Chubb believes, Chubb sees. What Chubb doesn't believe, Chubb can't see. So the problem is another one of our catch-22s. Believing is seeing, and then immediately seeing is believing. You know, the minute we see something, we believe it's real, and we don't have the other half of the equation, which is the reason we're seeing it is because we believe it's real. So there's a little locked up catch-22 there. So if we're listening to Chubb, we're seeing Chubb's belief about stuff, and that includes all the dualities in our experience, you know, right and wrong and good and bad, and war and peace, and man's inhumanity to man, and animals killing animals, and us killing animals, and, you know, tsunamis and hurricanes and guns and terrorism and all that stuff is entirely in the human concept of whatever it is we're looking at that is really God expressing itself. But we're seeing Chubb's concepts of all these things as very strongly reinforced for us and maintained for us through the media blitz that's going on in our civilization today. But what we're seeing is what Chubb believes if we're tuned into Chubb. Now, if we had no concepts at all, if Chubb were to shut down for 1 minute and there were no concepts in consciousness at all, we would still see the individualizations of God, but now they would all reflect the nature of God, and they would all be harmonious and fulfilled and complete and joyful and being the fulfilled expression of what God is expressing itself as that individualization. If we had no concepts at all, what we would see would be the full expression of God as that individualization, still at our level of consciousness, which is material right now, because we're not done with that phase, we're doing that phase separately, but still at our level of consciousness we would see that materially, because we're human, but everything would be harmonious and peaceful and joyful and fulfilled, and there would be no discords, and there wouldn't be no lack and limitation, and there would be no disease or sickness, and there would be none of these things that Joel called error. So, and it is error, it's an erroneous material sense of God, where you could have a truthful material sense of God, which is to say it wouldn't be true in the sense that God is not material, but it would be truthful in that it would reflect the nature of God as harmony and fulfilled and complete. So, it is to the extent that we are tuned into Chubb, collective human belief, that we are seeing all these discords and lacks and limitations and all the negative things that we see. And unfortunately, it's in the media's best interest to propagate the discords and problems and difficulties, because that's what people like to watch. That's what sells advertising time. So it's in media's best interest to play to our terrors and our fears and our scripts, and to play to all of this stuff. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, like I was saying last week with respect to hurricanes and blizzards and stuff, as it plays on as it sells product by playing with our fears about stuff. It reinforces those fears, and the next time around the fear is stronger, and it works just like the script catch-22. I believe it, so I see it, and because I see it, I now believe it more strongly, and because I believe it more strongly, I see it more clearly. And so the media, now that media is so good, so prolific, the catch-22 is really a very tight bond. So that's really the nature of God, and the nature of individualization, and the nature of error. about as summarized as I can make it, and I would love for you all to listen to this a couple of times over the week and write down any questions you have, or come up with questions to lead to a deeper explanation or a clearer explanation, because this is what we have to know in order to arrive at a state of consciousness that's full of peace. Now, the only way out of the media catch-22 is through spiritual work, meditation. And that's why we're all in this class, and that's why all the spiritual work and spiritual is proliferating just the same as media is proliferating. So is the spiritual work. That's the omni-action in action. And as media gets worse, so does the number of gurus and teachers and people to enlighten us as to truth increase. And because the only way we don't get out of this Chubb problem as a group. Chubb slowly raises, but as I said a couple of weeks ago, it raises like 5 points on the consciousness scale every generation or every lifetime. So Chubb is not getting out of this. The only way we get out of it is individually. You know, I experience my level of consciousness, and it's my level of consciousness that has to change, not Chubb's. What I have to do is stop listening to Chubb, stop believing the obvious lies of Chubb, and meditate so that I can approach silence, so that God, aka omni-action, can reveal itself to me as it really is. And this is what the healing consciousness is all about. It's a healing conscious, a healer, a practitioner is someone who has a high enough consciousness that he or she can lift the patient in consciousness to an altitude where the truth about the nature of the individual being is revealed. In other words, if you go to a practitioner with a disease, the practitioner, knowing that there is no such thing, lifts you. Since you've turned yourself over to the practitioner, by going to the practitioner, you've turned your consciousness over to the practitioner's consciousness. And since the practitioner's consciousness knows that all there is God, and that you are in reality a spiritual being, and that your body is in reality the body of God, the spiritual body of God, the practitioner, by the strength of their consciousness, lifts you to that level of consciousness where the disease can't exist. And that looks like a healing. It looks like the disease dissolving. There never was a disease there. It was just a false belief there that needed to be lifted above, not cured. That makes sense? We decide what we turn our consciousness over to. And we can either turn it over to the nightly news show, or we can turn it over to Infinite Way audios, or Matt Kahn audios, or any of the Infinite Way teachers, or Adyashanti, or there are so many wonderful teachers out there, all presenting different, all revealing different aspects of the nature of God. And they all have level of consciousness that's high enough to realize what they're teaching, and therefore when we submit to them and go to them for a teaching, we get lifted, because by going to them we have turned our consciousness over to them, and because they have realized it, their consciousness is higher than ours and therefore stronger, and so we get lifted into seeing that. And this is what the process is of what I call omni-activity. That as the nature of media increases, so do the number of gurus have to increase, because, you know, it's all going to reveal that God is fully expressed and beautifully expressed, perfectly expressed. It's all going to reveal that eventually, because that's the nature of the individualizations, and every individualization is going to be revealed as the fullness and completeness and harmoniousness of God. And so omni-activity has to keep up with media blitz. And it does so, it keeps ahead of it. But not very much, it seems like. I'm going to stop there. That was mostly review and not much new stuff, but a restating and maybe much more succinctly stating. And I'm going to stop there, and then hopefully starting next class I won't feel like I have to review that all every time, and we can go on to new material, because I do want to talk about healing consciousness, I do want to talk about supply, I do want to talk about grace, I do want to talk about Ho'oponopono, I do want to talk about things there which are really examples of all this stuff I've said. So please go back and listen to this one at least until you think you hear what it says, until you think you understand it, so that we can move forward next week. And with that, it's 51 after the hour. Let's take a break until the top of the hour, and then we'll come back. I'll try to see if I can't get the phone to work in the meantime. And if you all will remember to not talk during the break, so that we can keep our consciousness at whatever level it's at, that would be appreciated. Thank you.